Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today. We at Lisa are humbled by the love and support you all have shown us to our, PodiumX series throughout the Stanford Rebuild journey in the last, 7 series that we've kind of created here. For those of you joining us for the first time, Leda, a lead incubator and startup accelerator, or Lisa, was founded by Stanford GSB lead participants for the lead community. And it is an ecosystem for innovators and startup founders, and it's the first hybrid platform for incubating ideas to MVP and then scaling those ventures globally. And the PodiumX series is our curated engagement platform designed within Lisa, focused on founders, venture capital, industry, thought leadership, emerging tech, and the product ecosystems. My name is Deepti Pava. I'm a founding partner at Lisa. I'm living in Switzerland. And let me introduce you to the rest of our partners as well. So we have here on the call, Edward Munt. He's based on the East Coast in US. Hira Dangol, he's based in the Bay Area. Joe Anthony, who's actually not there today, but he's based out of Sydney, Australia. And we also have Misha Baikov, who is based out of Silicon Valley. We look forward today to our engaging panel discussion with global social innovators, investors, and founders. Just to lead you into the conversation a bit, societies worldwide are facing challenges, changes on a monumental scale, specifically at this point in time, and social entrepreneurs can and do contribute to this transformation in very important ways. And we at Lisa recognize this incredible visionary thinking and actions that make social impact real. And this was also the idea behind Stanford Rebuild as well. But these innovations do not just happen. They can be difficult to introduce as difficult to introduce as the challenges they are trying to solve itself. So today's session, we have people who have committed themselves to developing and supporting social innovations and creating new partnerships and ecosystems. So we hope to learn today from Tenzin Seldon, the founding partner at The Plant, Madison Campbell, CEO at Leda Health, Elizabeth Funk, founder at Dignity Capital, Annabelle Williams, founder and CEO at Grit and Gold. And the fantastic panel today would be moderated today by Samira Khan. She's the Senior Manager of Global Impact Engagement at Salesforce. Before I pass on the conversation to Samira, we have an important announcement to make. At the end of this session today, Lisa team has arranged for an opportunity for all of you to have a networking lounge to help you connect with other global founders like yourself. So please do stay on after the panel discussion for about 30 minutes to 1 hour, as much as you like, and engage in some enriching conversations. And let's make our last talk a little bit more engaging than usual. So with that, I will leave it to you, Samira, to take it forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deepti. So we just want to open this up by giving each of you an opportunity to describe some of your work to date in your own words. And this is not just in terms of your specific, enterprise or the work you do today, but also anything that you're doing to really support the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So Annabelle, would love to hear a little bit from you, just a description of your work.
Thank you so much, Samira, and hi everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm in Sydney, which I think was mentioned, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. So I've been asleep for a few hours, so I'm just warming up my voice. But it really is a pleasure to be here. I'm a Paralympian. I competed in 2 Paralympic Games, and my work now, I attended Stanford last year. I completed the Stanford Executive Program, and I'm a lawyer by training. And at that point, I was the General Counsel for the Australian Olympic Committee, which is a role I'd been in for 5 years. And prior to that, I was an M&A lawyer for a long time. But I'd always worked within the Paralympic space and community, and it had always been something I was extremely passionate about. And having grown up with a disability, I didn't think that there was enough support for young people with a disability, and I didn't think that there was enough inclusion generally in any of the work environments I'd been in my corporate life. And so I came back from Stanford, quit my job as a lawyer, and started Grit and Gold in August last year. So my entrepreneurial journey is relatively new. And most of my work was actually in the United States. I spoke at large conferences and I consulted to organizations. So it was an incredible whirlwind, and then it came to an abrupt halt, that kind of work, in March this year. I was actually in Saudi Arabia and had to come back on an emergency flight. And so I've spent the last few months pivoting my business to a digital model, which has been challenging, but really rewarding. And so that's kind of the journey I'm on at the moment. And the other work, I'm involved in a number of different organizations, but one of the ones that I thought I could touch on during the course of this conversation is an impact fund. And I'm a founding partner of that, called Reaction. And it was actually our Stanford cohort that started the fund, and we invest in organisations that have a social impact mission, and I can speak more about that as well. So that's who I am, and that's kind of the work that I do.
Thank you, Annabelle. Would love to unpackage more about, you know, your experience around the Paralympic context and how that played into your passion for inclusion and what you did next. Would love to sort of talk more with you on that through the course of this conversation. So speaking of funding, Elizabeth, would love to turn it over to you as an investor to give a little bit about your background and what's top of mind to you and what you've been working on.
Sure, thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm joining from San Francisco. I was a Stanford alum from undergrad. And so I started my entrepreneurial journey at Yahoo. After graduating from business school, I was one of the first 30 employees at Yahoo, and I learned a lot about entrepreneurship and starting a company back when the internet was just getting started. But after I left Yahoo, I wanted to get involved in something that made a difference and started researching things that I felt passionate about. And I really got bitten by the bug of microfinance and, you know, the idea of lending small amounts of money to people around the world so that they could start their own businesses, and harnessing the power of entrepreneurship, even at the micro level, where people could build their own way out of poverty. So I started a microfinance investment fund, one of the earliest impact investment funds back when it was really taboo. In fact, what really got me started on it was when I was researching microfinance. Muhammad Yunus, who's sort of the founder of microfinance movement, had invited me to join their board, and I sat in as an observer on one of the first meetings. And you know, I started, could be done with impact investment dollars. And I said, why are we doing this nonprofit? Why don't we do this for profit? And he said, oh, that's unethical. It's unethical to make money while doing good. And then Steve Rockefeller, who was on their board, pulled me aside and he said, don't worry about the ethics. It's just not possible to make money while doing good. And I left that meeting thinking, okay, now you've challenged me. Now I'm going to do it. So I started my first fund really as a proof of concept to prove it could be done. Since then, I've raised several impact investment funds over the years. My current fund is focused on Latin America. We do Nicaragua, Honduras, Panama, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Peru, investing in low-income housing and sustainable agriculture. But I've raised numerous funds, raised a fund of funds in impact investing. So I've been around this space since 2001, which was really when it was getting started, the whole impact investment movement. And now my current project is I'm starting another fund, this one based here at home. I'm working on setting up an impact investment fund for homelessness in California. So a real challenge, but I'm very excited to see what we might be able to do when you mobilize for-profit investment dollars. That's really what it takes to get to scale, and I believe it's a problem that's going to need that scale to be solved.
Well, clearly you don't take no for an answer, and you're trying to change the rules of the game. So I'm sure you'll have a lot of great advice for some of the people on this call. Madison, would love to turn it over to you to kind of share some more about your background.
Yeah, of course. So hi, everyone. I'm Madison Campbell. I'm the CEO of Leda Health, calling in from Palm Springs, California, hence the very floral get up. So what we've done at Leda is create the first ever at-home sexual assault evidence collection kit. So right now, if you are sexually assaulted, which I was on my college campus, like 1 in 4 women will be, you only have one option. And that option is to go to a hospital, get a 4 to 8 hour long procedure done, poked and prodded, police officers, nurses. It's oftentimes re-traumatizing. And even if you go through that process, it on average will take 2 years for you to get your kit tested. Within the government, there's over 200,000 of these kits backlogged. So what we're creating is a for-profit, and to go off of what Elizabeth said, people have definitely called me unethical, for running a for-profit venture and trying to privatize this industry. It's one of those things where the government has not worked for a long time. Sexual assault is a massive atrocity, not only in the United States, but abroad. I started this company because my last work was based in Lagos, Nigeria. I was running a company over there, trying to end unemployment by getting software engineers jobs in America, in the UK. And one of our software engineers, who was a woman, was sexually assaulted. And she said, there is no justice in Nigeria. And so, what we're trying to do is bring justice to a global scale by allowing sexual assault survivors to collect evidence, be able to test it, and move forward with their cases. I'm also kind of, the queen of controversy. So within 1 month of starting the company, we received 16 cease and desist letters, 5 subpoenas, 2 bills introduced to try to ban us, and 16 members of Congress that reached out to us. So, kind of creating controversy is my middle name. It's something that I think, good startups have to do. And we need to, tip the scale. We need to change the criminal justice system. And that's kind of been my focus and passion. Thank you.
I didn't quite realize how much ethics, justice, and the public sector might play into this conversation. So that's super interesting. And I saw in the chat somebody, left a comment about the significance of scale, and hopefully we'll get into that as well later. Tenzin, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm in San Francisco as well. I've been in the climate and refugee space for about over 10 years now. For me, it was not a question of passion. It was a question of there's no choice. I grew up in the Indian Himalayas. I'm a Tibetan refugee. And growing up, I realized early on that because of the way that the climate ecosystem was changing and the way that global warming was shifting our mountains, that there will be a lot more displaced people. And now the predicted rate of that is about 1 billion people in the next 30 years who will not have a home as a result of this climate and as a result of the way we're treating this planet. So I've been on this journey of working in climate and refugee issues for the last 10 years, and now I'm doing that through the vehicle of The Plant, which is a company that has 2 historic properties in New York. My partner and I, Leila Gorin, and I are taking these 2 large historic properties and transforming them to becoming a home for climate. This is one of the few movements that doesn't have a home. And it's critical that every movement in the world, whether it's a women's movement or civil rights, has a physical home. It's more than just being symbolic. It's also the importance of congregating and working together with the spirit of collaboration instead of the spirit of scarcity. So that's what I've been working on for the last 2 years.
And I love how Madison also shared some of her personal story. And so Tenzin, would love to just have you take us back in time, almost on a journey to some of the earliest influences in your life that impacted A, your decision to become an entrepreneur, and B, to work on this cause or space. Just share some of your early influences, something about your childhood or a young adult experience, anything that takes us back in time.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's an interesting question, because for me, I grew up in a community that, my parents had escaped from a country that was invaded. They walked months through the Himalayas, dodging soldiers' bullets to make it to India. And when they were there, I remember growing up thinking anything is possible because of the fact that the price of freedom was so high. The price of equality was so high that they had to trade their personal freedom for my security. And just remembering that every day, they had a huge imprint on me. I think the other members of, other migrant and minority communities in India I grew up with, I just can't forget them, because they were just going about their everyday lives and trying to make the most of what they had with the resources they had. So really, for me, my early impressions of heroes were the immigrants I grew up with, that I worked with. And there was this important notion of like working with each other instead of, you know, working against each other.
That's really special. Thank you for sharing that. Madison, thanks for also sharing a bit of your personal story and your why for what you're pursuing. What were some of your earlier influences before you got into this work, whether it's your decision to become an entrepreneur or the topic you're working on? Just would love for you to take us back in time as well.
This is when I want to give a shout out to my mom. My mom's the best. Like I think as a female entrepreneur, I've had a lot of very strong women help raise me. And my mother and my grandmother are some of the strongest women that I could ever imagine. And I think back to a story. So when I was in 8th grade, you could only check out a few number of books at the library. And I was such an avid reader, right? I would want to check out, you know, 4 or 5 books, and there was definitely rules, right? Rules were put into place. I wasn't allowed to do this, but I went around the rules. And, you know, one of the most important things that my mother did for me, I mean, God willing, she was up at that principal's office basically every other week, is I would break these rules that I thought were ridiculous, and she would go and support me, right? So when I would check out too many books, and, you know, she would come up and be like, well, you know, you should support her reading. When I, you know, would wear too many straps, they had a strap rule, you know, she would come and say, well, you know, she's standing up for something. I mean, I remember a time where I got the handbook and I circled, you know, rules that I did not agree with, and I put it to the principal and I said, these are unjust, right? And without my parents saying, you know, if you see something is unjust in the world, you can stand up to it and you can change it, I don't think I would be here today, right? I realized that there was a huge injustice happening, and because of the way that I was raised, I knew that I could stand up to it. So yeah, I think my mom for helping me get into the entrepreneurship journey by not making me feel kind of crazy for when I wanted to stand up for something that I didn't believe in.
No, really amazing. I know how important, you know, mothers and sort of other women in your life can be as role models, but I love how she stood up for you no matter what you did. Speaking of breaking the rules, Elizabeth, I know you're doing game-changing work right now. What led to that, and what are some of your early influences?
So, you know, my first entrepreneurial effort was at Yahoo, and I think I learned a lot about, you know, what do you do when there aren't rules, right? So the internet was just getting started, and we didn't know what was going to work and what wasn't, and so, you know, we didn't have the luxury of over-analyzing things. So that was actually a benefit, and I think being able to just come up with an idea, put it out on the web, and you can watch and see whether people are using it, whether they're not, what aspect of it they're using, and to be able to modify and adjust and learn as you go. And I think that's been a fundamental belief for me, which is go on a hunch, you know, take your bet, don't overthink it, and, you know, get in there and see what works and what doesn't, right? And so, you know, I think with my Dignity Fund, which was the fund that was microfinance, you know, I didn't know anything about microfinance, and I didn't do a big, deep, long study about it. But fundamentally, I had a hunch that it would work. And we did a small first fund, see what happened, and try to prove a concept. And so I think I learned really early on the value of trial and error, and the value of the entrepreneur's gut, and to not overthink things. So now what I'm doing with, and I also learned, because I fundamentally believe that the power of entrepreneurship is a very, very powerful driver, and people being able to chart their own way and start their own business, even if it's just getting the money to buy a sewing machine so that they could start selling school uniforms, or buy a thermometer so that the milk from their cows could be pasteurized and turned into cheese, which is higher value. You know, $100 loans can change someone's life, not just because of the money, but because it allows them to build their own way out of poverty. And so I really believe that if you could sort of hook your cart to the entrepreneurial horse and give it a whip and let it go, that really impressive things happen. So now that I'm trying to embark on a homelessness one, it is an absolute shot in the dark. I don't know anything about homelessness other than for the last 5 months, I've done a crash course in networking my way around the industry, figuring out who's who and what works and what doesn't. And just fundamentally, I believe that if we're going to change problems at scale, you need to find a profit model and a business model that can be sustainable. So I'm kind of jumping into the deep end, and just have to have optimism and faith that things work out.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's super interesting. I had a question around, asking each of you about the challenges you're facing in entrepreneurship, especially in light of COVID, and how you're overcoming those key barriers. But given what you just said, I think I've modified my question. Really want to hear from each of you what the key to entrepreneurship is. If there's one key, what do you think it is, and how does it apply to your work? So I'll definitely ask that later. But before we get to that, Annabelle, would love to hear some of your early influences and what's shaped your work today. I know inclusion is a very sort of important topic, yet it's also historically been underfunded in some ways, and there's a lot more user testing and testing to be done in that space, as well as just a general understanding of what it means. So would love to hear more about your background and your work in terms of influences.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm going to echo almost what Madison said. I have to give a shout out to my mum and my grandma. I equally had these incredible female role models, and I feel like this is always slightly awkward on Zoom. I don't know if I explained my disability. I'm missing my half of my left arm. I always feel like on Zoom it's a bit of a show and tell, which is different to being in person. But when I was young, I obviously looked very different. I grew up in a community where I didn't know a single soul, another person who had a disability. And I remember one day at school, I was probably about 10, and this little boy, he asked me if he could sit next to me the next day at lunch. And I remember thinking, this is as close as a 10-year-old gets to being asked out on a date. And so I remember feeling so excited, and I went home and told my parents and my grandma that Todd, his name was, that Todd had asked to sit next to me the next day at lunch. And the next day we sat next to each other and we had this great lunch. But at the end of lunch, Todd stood up and he said in front of all of my, of course, I forced all of my girlfriends to sit just next to us, and Todd and I sat very awkwardly and had some very awkward conversation. And at the end of lunch, Todd stood up and said in front of all of my friends and everyone who could hear that he was never, ever going to sit anywhere near me again because he thought it was so weird that I only had one arm. And I remember feeling so alone. It was it's the first memory I have of really feeling that everyone thought I was different, and that what Todd was saying was actually how everyone felt about me. And I remember I went home and I told my parents and my grandma that I was never, ever going back to school again. And my grandma, she'd become a widow at the age of 25, she had 2 young children when she became a widow very suddenly. And she was my soulmate. I remember she looked at me and she said, "You cannot run away from your fears." And then she said, "The way you see yourself is the way other people are going to see you." And then I remember that night she sat with me on my bed and she said, "You don't worry about Todd. To be happy, you just need someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to." And every day, almost every evening, I have written down who I love, someone I love, something that I'm really looking forward to, and something that I have to do. And it's given me a huge sense of purpose. And so my key influences from when I was, my inspiration now is still, my grandma's passed away, but she's a huge inspiration to me. And that's one example of a number of people who throughout my life made me, through their kindness and courage, really. I had a lot of teachers who really stood up for me, and friends and things along the way. And that's given me a really, I think that was part of the reason why I felt like I really wanted to give back, and help young children with a disability who may not have the support network around them that I had. And so they've been huge influences in my life.
So on this note of purpose and happiness and fulfillment, and this very personal sort of experience and journey that you shared, from your perspective, whether it's personal or professional, if you had to choose one key to entrepreneurship or your entrepreneurial journey, what would it be? And in particular, how do you see that key playing out in our current environment, or the COVID world, or a post-COVID world?
sorry, it broke up a little bit at the end there. Sorry, Samira, can you just repeat the question?
Sorry, no, I was just asking for one key. If you had to say that this is the key to your entrepreneurial journey, or this is the key to entrepreneurship, what would you say to aspiring entrepreneurs? And in particular, how do you feel that key plays out in sort of a post-COVID world or environment?
Okay. I think, and this actually ties in with my personal life. You know, when I was growing up, it was hard to hear a lot of those kinds of comments from people like Todd, and there was plenty of them all the time, people constantly making remarks on the side. I'd see the way people glance at me, and I was I got a lot of negative feedback throughout my life. And actually, I think that's been a really important part of my entrepreneurial journey. A lot of people, no one likes to get bad news or look at the negatives, but I think the most successful entrepreneurs who I look up to and who I've worked with are people who really look at the negative feedback and the data that maybe isn't so pleasant, and they adapt and make changes and pivot their business accordingly. They make sure that they're constantly being agile and figuring out ways to, maneuver to make sure they're offering what their customers are wanting. That's something that I think is really key.
Thanks for sharing that. And in the comments, I see that Madison's saying never be a Todd. So Todd really messed up. So I thought that
Poor Todd. Honestly, I've spoken at so many events, and that is his real name. And I feel like I should have given him a fake name somewhere along the line, because now I imagine at some conference he's going to stand up and there's Todd, and he's going to say, "I was 10. Can you stop telling this story?"
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. No, I agree, never be a Todd. So thanks for that. Elizabeth, now building off of the work that you've already shared, the game-changing work that you've shared, what would you say is the one key to your entrepreneurial journey or entrepreneurship in general? And any changes, or how do you see that playing out in the world we're living in right now, which is new for a lot of people, this sort of COVID / post-COVID world?
So I think, the key for me is having partners. And it kind of goes without saying, but it's really pretty fundamental, which when you're charting a new path, it's scary and you second guess yourself. Anybody, even the bravest entrepreneur, does. And I liken it to jumping off of a bridge with a bungee jump, right? I have a terrible fear of heights, and there is no way, even if I had decided I wanted to bungee jump, that I would at that last moment actually do the jump. But if you've got a partner holding you accountable and you both have made the decision, there's something about that camaraderie and that joint bond that you then do it because you feel like you kind of have to, right? And I think as I look back, even though the ideas in all the cases of my entrepreneurship program have been my own ideas, to have a partner or other partners who sanity check, you don't second guess yourself and think maybe I'm totally crazy here. If you've got other minds to work on it with you. And I feel like, I feel like that's having a partner is more than just double the number of man hours that you can, or woman hours that you can put towards the project. It's really exponential in facilitating the courage that it takes and the clarity of thinking to take risks, especially when it is game changing.
Thanks for that. I do realize that we only have, a couple minutes left before Q&A. So would love for people to start, entering in their questions for Q&A. And so I'd love to shift gears a little bit, because I heard some amazing themes around partnership and data and the importance to entrepreneurship. I specifically have spent my career in social impact and social entrepreneurship. So would love to hear from you what you think the role is of data and partnerships in social entrepreneurship, and what makes, trying to have a social impact with your business or your work different. So Tenzin, would love to hear a little bit from you on social entrepreneurship, what you think makes it different, and the role of data and partnerships, or anything really that you think is the key given the social impact aspect of what you're trying to do.
I would say, first I want to answer the previous question. I think that for me, one of the most important aspects of being an entrepreneur is perspective. I think the most successful entrepreneurs I know that have been able to be steady in the game for many years have really long-sighted vision and perspective. Actually, one of my spiritual teachers was telling me, like, when I was young, he said, train your mind to think in eons, not in decades or even centuries. Like having really the long-stand perspective of what does this mean. So that's that. I mean, I think for partnership and data, that's essential. As Elizabeth, you were saying before, when you were being met with the challenge of, doing good can't make profit. I would say actually the opposite. I think nowadays there is such an appetite for making sure that you do good and that you have the data and financial resources to back it up. So for our end, for the plant, for example, we have as many in-depth social analysis and data that we collect as we do on the side of getting revenue as we do for impact. We have 7 social impact metrics that we really make sure every single one is taken into consideration. And we notice that in doing that, we actually have a greater loyalty from the community we serve and from the people that are within the network. So I think social impact, really what it is that it's a system-wide perspective. It's a whole design perspective. It's not just about extracting and taking wealth, but it's also about making sure that while you're sustainable economically and financially, you also are taking the whole design perspective, the perspective of the individual, the perspective of the consumer, the partner, the ecosystem, the planet. And so in those ways, I actually think the future will be all social impact. I think in 100 to 200 years, that they will be a conscious community of that won't be separated into boxes where we have separate labels for us, but that every single business will have to go down this path. We're already seeing that because the needs of customers and consumers are changing. And I even see that with Gen Z, their demands for what a company should be in terms of ethics and principles is as high as their demands of quality of the actual product.
Madison, I would love to have you speak a little bit about the social impact side of your work. And then Tenzin mentioned this notion of short-term versus long-term and going into the future. Would also love to hear a little bit more about how you're thinking about the future and what might be different for entrepreneurs or those looking to have a social impact.
Yeah, so, primarily our company attracts ages 13 to 25-year-olds. So we grew our company from 2, female entrepreneurs. My co-founder's from Kathmandu, Nepal, first generation immigrant, absolutely amazing. And we now have 60 people because, college students are really passionate about now making a change in the world, right? It's becoming one of these things where you can recruit some of the best talent and you can really grow your company if you do have that core mission. And if you are, disrupting something big enough. And to answer like a question around, what's that one entrepreneurship tip? I have one that I've kept thinking in the back of my mind, which is, if people aren't mad at you, you're not disrupting something big enough, because there's always going to be people mad at you, and that's a good thing, right? If you're trying to change the world, specifically in social impact, there's going to be a lot of people that don't want you, to change the world. They want you to they want everything to stay the same. They don't think in the present. They don't think with the future. They don't think about the next generation. And so, with social impact and what I think people really need to start thinking about is how big of a change are you going to make for that next generation, right? Maybe it's not in your generation that you can solve homelessness or sexual assault or anything like that, or climate change, but thinking about your children's generation and knowing that what you're trying to do and trying to build is going to impact that generation. And I think that that's something that, early talent and a lot of early adopters will see and be super, super passionate about.
I was just thinking about myself. I need to get far more comfortable with people being mad at me. And I often wonder if it's just because of how I've grown up or otherwise, which gets me to a little bit of a controversial or different point around being a female entrepreneur. And if you think that's any different or what makes it different, I would like to just open this up to any of the panelists to answer if you think being a female makes entrepreneurship different, or if it's more about sort of characteristics, like what role does gender play, if any? And then I have some great questions from the audience as well. So anyone want to take that one? I would hate to have to call on somebody.
So I'll talk about in terms of being a female entrepreneur and raising capital. I think there's a very interesting thing that happened. So when I started my company, the first thing that was told to me is I have a less than 2% chance of getting funded, right? That is the first thing out the door you're told. I mean, it's like, oh my God, you're like, okay, thank you. Like less than 2% chance, amazing, right? So you have this different power dynamic you do have to address just merely by starting, right? The odds are not in your favor, you know, akin to the Hunger Games, right? It's just not in your favor. And then I think something that was very interesting for me, like raising capital, being a female entrepreneur in a, you know, very male-driven world, is not only was the odds not in my favor, you know, with fundraising, but the majority of people that allocate capital are older, you know, white guys, right? Who have, you know, for a long time had a lot of power, a lot of, you know, power over women, have been able to use that power in negative ways. And so not only did I have to kind of straight on address, hey, I'm a female entrepreneur, I'm a minority business owner, but also having to straight up address, you know, a large group of folks who historically have not treated women well and have sexually discriminated against them and have sexually harassed them and sexually assaulted them. So, you know, if you really want to like have the game, go and try to do anything around like the, you know, sexual assault or sex space when raising capital, because you have to do two things. You have to convince them that you're the right business owner, and also convince them that, oh, you might have been a bad person in the 70s when you used to slap, you know, a girl on her ass, and that used to be okay, and now it's not, right? So it's been very interesting kind of dealing with those power dynamics.
And did you intentionally then pursue female sort of funders? Sorry, someone else is going to say something, I think. Yeah. Go ahead.
You're right. No,
Madison,
carry on. I was going to say, but you carry on. You answer that.
I wish, but actually, so the majority of people that got into our fundraising round were fathers with daughters that were in college. And they understood, understood. They're like, I have a daughter, I want to take care of my daughter. You know, so that not everybody is bad out there. You know, we have a few female investors, but you do have to get super comfortable with finding the right folks.
I think that, oh yeah, Annabelle, sorry, you were saying.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's right. And I think like now is the time. Now is really the time to push. And I think that I remember I had this experience when I was 19. So I was on the Australian swim team, and I realized that at the national swimming championships is a really big deal in Australia. It's televised, prime time, kind of like the NBA, nowhere near as massive, but Australia's small scale equivalent. And I realized that at this national championship competition every single year, we were seeing all these able-bodied athletes on TV, but there were all these athletes with a disability, and they were strategically putting their races during the ad breaks so they didn't have to televise athletes with a disability. And I remember thinking that was so unfair. And I spoke to some of the, I was very young and I was a law student at the time, thought that I could change the world. And I spoke to some of the board members at Swimming Australia. And I was lucky to have a few allies. And this is kind of the point that Elizabeth made about having, you know, partners or supporters. And they said to me, let's go to the network and speak to them about it. And I remember walking into this room as a 19-year-old woman. There were 15 senior executive men from this large TV network in Australia. And I basically said to them, you guys should televise all the disabled races because the stories are incredible. These athletes are elite. And they basically laughed me out of the building. And so we had to rethink our strategy and we went back. But I remember the experience was really daunting because I remember feeling, gosh, I'm the only woman in this whole room and I'm also very young. And so something that empowers me when I'm making these decisions, because I think at some point you've just got to, you know, with certain decisions, and when you're, as Madison said, trying to get people mad at you, it's a difficult position to be in. And so you just have to go for it. And I think it's a mindset thing. I imagine all these women who have gone before me who have really stood up for causes, and I think, all right, all of them are looking at me thinking, you got to make this happen. You've got to be sort of the next chink in the chain to add to this, to get to a point where we ultimately have equality. And I think now, 2020, with all the chaos and craziness that's going on in the world, now is the time to really continue that and fight harder than ever before. And we'll move. And progress is too slow, but any kind of forward momentum is good. So, and sometimes there'll be steps back, but if the net movement is forward, then that is something that's really positive.
I'll jump in here, which is, I think it's important, I've watched the impact investment industry and social entrepreneurship industry evolve over the last 20 years. And we can't lose track or shouldn't lose track of sort of the meta vision, which is that you're not just trying to start your company in its own right, but there's a demonstration effect. And so with Dignity Fund, my end goal was to see big financial institutions investing in microfinance, right? My little $10 million fund wasn't going to change the world, but what it would do is catalyze others. And so I set up my investment committee, and I had somebody from HSBC, somebody from Deutsche Bank, somebody from Citibank sit and watch the process so we could prove to them that this can be done and then encourage them to do it. I think with female entrepreneurship, there's something similar, which is that we are being watched, right? And this is a new industry and people are trying to figure it out. And so not only for the benefit of your business that you're trying to start, but be aware of the demonstration effect and be aware that you're inspiring others to do something similar and you're charting the path of how to do this. And there's a responsibility to that. And I think the other thing that's really changed is because of all of the awareness around gender equality, there are a lot of available resources in the ecosystem. There are female-only funds, there's a lot of support, and so you can chart the way and demonstrate how to use that and how others could use that and set an example.
Yeah, so on this sort of topic, there are two questions that emerged from the audience that pertain to at least part of that around funding, not necessarily partnership though. And one question specifically was for you, Elizabeth. Could you shed some light on how the journey went from being a fundraiser to a for-profit organization? I'm working on a similar startup, however, it's a hybrid concept. Would love to know more about your journey. And I'm actually gonna also ask the second question that was posed because I think there's somewhat related. For those involved in funds, how do you think an entrepreneur can find a fund that fits with their mission? What do you think is the most important aspect that funds look for in entrepreneurs who fit their mission? So anything around that or any comments around that, Elizabeth, would be awesome.
Sure. Well, I'll take the first one, which is that when I got involved in microfinance, I raised a for-profit fund, the Dignity Fund. But in my work in the industry, I also became acquainted with and ended up joining the board of a nonprofit called Unitas. And I ended up chairing that board for 8 years. And so I was right in this place of balancing both the for-profit and nonprofit. And so I commend the questioner because there is a role for doing both, and raising nonprofit dollars is more about creating the ecosystem. So in this particular case, it was capacity building for the microfinance organization and getting it ready that it was the size and scale that would then be eligible for for-profit money to come in and turbocharge it. But so there's definitely a benefit to being in both places. And I just feel like when you look at a problem that you want to get solved, and you think about going and asking for philanthropy, if you just look at the business model a little harder and try to figure out if there isn't a way that this could be for profit. And I believe that when it's for profit, first of all, the accountability for the management team, rather than just getting donations they can spend at their leisure, right? Get the accountability, the reporting, all of the things that come with a for-profit business, that in and of itself helps turbocharge the business, even in addition to the money that could come in in either form. And so looking hard at a business model and saying, is there a way to make this for profit or at least break even, and converting to a social enterprise, a for-profit social enterprise, if at all possible. There are some topics that really need to be philanthropy driven, and that there just isn't a for-profit solution, but there may be a way to do things side by side like we did in microfinance.
Absolutely love that, Elizabeth. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. Salesforce has been engaged in a World Economic Forum Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs, and they're really struggling right now. So just liquidity, cash issues, and I'm constantly thinking about how can we transform more of their work into earned revenue or a for-profit model. And a lot of nonprofits now are talking about, quote, pivoting to a social enterprise model. I thought that concept is very interesting in sort of the nonprofit / social enterprise intersection. Tenzin, I know you also mentioned sort of this long tail, change in model or shift in model to being more purpose driven as well as profit focused at the same time. And you believe that's where the future lies. So would love to hear a little bit more from you on that and that mindset shift and kind of what drives it. And there's also a question specifically for you from the audience. Have you visited Kathmandu, Nepal? There are lots of Tibetan refugees. How are they different from refugees settled in India? In Nepal, I find many of them seem to have many businesses open and are entrepreneurial. So if you could somehow weave those two together, that would be great.
It's funny because you asked that question. That I always say that immigrants, that I know are some of the best entrepreneurs because they have the adversity muscle. So it's like if you fall, they keep coming back. And yes, I have been to Nepal. Actually, my mom resettled for a portion of her life in Nepal. So I have family members there. And Tibetans, actually as a minority refugee group, have done significantly well in these refugee communities because they've been able to take the little that they have and then they crowdsource the money together, almost as like a micro lending with each other. And then they build small businesses, which then scale and succeed. So yes, I have noticed that. And the difference between the Tibetan refugees who live in Nepal and India is just different locations, but the ethos and the culture and the practice of preservation is the same. In terms of what we were talking about, how I said that the future will have to be impact. I'm only saying that from the data trends I've seen with what Gen Z, millennials, younger people care about, what they're asking and what they're demanding for. And so that's the pattern that I'm looking at right now. In terms of raising funds, I think it's important for me to address this question about what is something that I live by is that I think you have to get comfortable as an entrepreneur to say no as well. Most entrepreneurs, and I fell into this trap, that we have a scarcity mindset, that we don't have enough. And so we have to say yes to every check that comes our way, yes to every partnership that comes our way. And sometimes that yes can dilute what your company's vision is. So my partner and I, we are also two female founders right now. And I've done the very small raise for a startup, and now we're at a much larger raise. She and I have raised 115 million in the last few months, and we're raising a 330 million for cap table, a minimum of 5. So if you think about it, those are very large numbers. And as you go up and asking people who are at that wealth level, you notice that you have to, on our end, be comfortable saying, no, you're not the right partner for us at this moment. I'm so sorry, we're going to move on because this is not the right investor. So we have to be as diligent as an entrepreneur on our side of making sure that we are accepting the money and the people who we need in our network. Because if we compromise, then I feel that that's when everything falls apart.
That's great. I had heard a lot about sort of the other side of the table, but not much about those seeking funding being choosier and being more strategic. And I think it sort of plays off of one of Madison's comment that usually, and not in necessarily her case, but they are people who are, let's say, older or of a certain race, and they don't always understand the full context. So how do you diversify, your funding sources and who's coming in, who's sitting at the table with you, I think is super interesting. So there's another question. It wasn't specifically for anybody, but I would love to ask it to Madison. Madison, if you're comfortable answering, what do we do when investors say you don't look the part? I've experienced this so many times, and some say because I'm from the Philippines. So investors are more focused on startups in developed countries.
Yeah, and to answer a couple of the questions back to, there's a saying that we have in our company. It's called morals over money. So always make, no matter what, even if someone offers you, millions and millions of dollars, morally speaking, if you can't get on that same culture basis, don't accept it. And to also go off of like the for-profit, thing, if you can make it. Right. But also realize that it's like people will call you names, right? I've been called, and I quote, a dirty scammer trying to make a quick buck from the North Carolina Attorney General, profiting off of sexual assault, profiting off of the Me Too movement, a neoliberal capitalist, like every like name you can hear under the book. I love it. It's great. Keep calling me that. Right. But understand that that's okay. Right. There's going to be people that just don't understand. And it's okay to, actually make capital and do a lot of good in the world. And to those folks who say you don't look the part, that's just ridiculous, right? There's no, specific way that you have to look. I mean, for instance, my co-founder is from Kathmandu, Nepal. And she, doesn't have a very strong accent, right? And so when we sometimes, or really looks very, just not traditionally looks like an immigrant, right? And so when we go to minority-based funds, there are sometimes where people will actually question her ethnicity, as well as question like, oh, are you actually minority enough? Are you actually like this? Are you actually that? Which is ridiculous, right? But that answers the question of like morals over money, right? If you go into a company, or if you go into fundraise or partnership or whatever, and they're saying you don't look the part, or you're not, this enough, or you're not that enough, that goes back to the morals over money. There is not a culture fit. They're never going to understand you, and, back away slowly, because those people are parasites. They will come into your company and wreak havoc, and it will be so much more havoc than a simple check that you think that you need.
And that's a great point. And we have time only for one more question. Annabelle, I'd love if you could take this one, and then I'll hand it over to Deepti to close this out. How did you find your partners that empowered your entrepreneurial journeys and shared your vision? So it was, for more than one person to answer. So maybe each person can answer it quickly. If you sought them out, how and where did you find them? Do you have a trial period before you hash out the partnership / DTR to find the relationship? So, I'd love to start with Annabelle. And Annabelle, if you want to go quickly, and then we can have everybody sort of just speak to partnerships, and then hand it over to Deepti, that would be great. Just like your sort of one sentence takeaway on working in partnership with others and finding good partners.
Gosh.
Sorry, Annabelle.
Yeah. Still 300 Zoom calls in and I'm still on mute. I don't have a partner. I'm at the early stage of this process, this entrepreneurial path. But in terms of people who have really supported, I feel like I've got partners because I have so many wonderful people who contribute a lot of time to helping me. And actually, most of them came from Stanford. It was the Stanford Executive Program and the people in that cohort that really gave me a lot of confidence to sort of start this journey, and to sort of, lawyers are inherently risk averse, and I was, and so taking that leap was really challenging for me. But the support that I've been provided by people who I call on a daily basis and have, opened their networks to me and given me extraordinary opportunities is really vital. So I don't have anything to sort of specifically say about having a partner. But definitely the people I work with are, and the advisors that I have been invaluable to the early success of Grit and Gold, but then also in this strange period who have given me really great guidance in terms of how to pivot the business to a digital model.
Super. And I think the notion or the definition of partnership is certainly changing with time. So I really love that. Elizabeth, are your sort of brief answer to how you go and find partners or what you look for?
Well, it's very timely because that's exactly what I've been in the process of doing in the last 5 months. When I made the decision to raise a fund for homelessness, ironically, you will not expect this answer, but the quarantine and Zoom have been a networking godsend because you can do 30-minute calls. So when I started researching homelessness, and you find one person and say, who can you introduce me to? And they introduce you to 3. And you ask those people, who can you introduce me to? And you know, I've networked like a mad woman in 30-minute increments for the last 5 months. And you just keep asking for, you know, do you know anyone who? And everyone, you get introduced to the craziest, you know, connections that some of them matter and some of them don't. But I've networked so much better than I could have ever done if I was just relying on going to events and that kind of thing. And as a part of that process, you find like-minded people. And in this process, I found Life Moves, which is a homelessness services organization down in Silicon Valley. And we just absolutely thought about things the same way. And so continued the conversation. And next thing I know, I've joined their board and I'm leading a joint venture effort. So network, and really, you know, 30-minute increments on Zoom. It's the secret. It's the secret.
Amazing. Whoever thought Zoom would be so helpful. Tenzin, yeah, Tenzin, over to you, and then Madison briefly. And I know Deepti needed a minute as well. So sorry to make us sort of alarmed with regards to time, but yeah, go for it.
My partner found me. We were speaking a few years ago at the UN together, and she turned around and said, "Who are you?" After we were done speaking. We were speaking about climate and different parts of climate. So yeah, that's how she found me, and we had a lot of mutual friends and colleagues in common. I think one of the things to remember when you're finding a co-founder or partner is that it's a trial and error. To me, it's almost like finding a life partner where there will be people who seem right for you in the beginning, but it takes time and it's not right for you after a while. And that breakup between a partner is also as important to be able to have the right attitude for. And the diligence process is critical, you know, as some of my colleagues were mentioning before. Really seeking that out, the values exchange, because I think in terms of work styles, it's always going to be different, and there's going to be someone who compliments you or not. But if the values in the beginning are too different, or the vision is too different, and you can't reconcile, then I think it's difficult to maintain a partnership.
Super. Yeah, Deepti just mentioned there'll be a networking lounge after this. So on the topic of partnerships. So now over to Madison, and then over back to Deepti.
I met my co-founder on Indeed.com. I posted a job, and I convinced her that I didn't have any money and she should come work for me for free. And at that point, and I completely random, right? Like internet. And Liesl, is my other half. I cannot say enough good things. If I did not have her, I would not be here today. And it's one of those things where in the toughest moments of your life, whether it's your co-founder, your partners, whether investors or anything like that, being able to have somebody that you fully trust is so important and so valuable. They will become your family. And so, until you kind of feel that family vibe, right? You can meet someone wherever, whether it's at a conference or on Indeed or on LinkedIn or, in a bathroom somewhere. You can meet your partner, for the rest of probably my life, in the weirdest of places. And when you find family, doesn't matter where you found them, they'll be family for life.
That's lovely. Deepti, to close it out, thank you so much, panelists.